welcome to the JD Power Travel Podcast. I'm Michael Taylor. I'm the Managing Director of Travel, Hospitality, and Retail at JD Power, and joining me is Andrea Stokes, who's our practice lead for travel in the hospitality section. Hello, Andrea.
Hello, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Yeah, it is January. So are attempting every year to use our January podcast as sort of predicting the year and looking at the trends going into the coming year. And that'll be the topic for today's podcast, what we see in the data at JD Power and what we see coming down the line. So I thought I'd start with probably one of the big news topics of this year is the performance of airlines and air travel in 2023. So just as a kind of a recap, everyone I'm sure is very familiar that the price of an airline ticket has grown substantially in 2022 and is continuing to grow in 2023 because the demand for leisure travel just hasn't dropped off as much as most people had thought. And there are fewer planes flying and there are fewer pilots flying those planes. And I think everyone has noticed that the load factor, or the percentage of seats being occupied in any one particular flight, certainly is quite higher than it used to be pre-pandemic. So what I see in the data for airlines is that there will be some slowing of demand as we go into 2023 for a couple different macroeconomic reasons, biggest one being inflation. We've had this pent-up demand for leisure travel post-pandemic. There were people who were saying, I don't care what it costs, I'm going to Vegas. And they certainly did. But, as Herb Stein, a famous economist, used to say, if something's too good to last, it won't. And I believe that's going to be the case here with airline travel as we go into the second half of the year, is that we will see some slack in demand there and prices will moderate a little bit. Now, financially, the airlines, from a cash flow perspective, are in actually pretty good shape. Their biggest issue economically and business-wise is trying to meet the demand as they perceive it. They see in their numbers for schedules and routing that they could be adding more planes to the air and more flights and turning quite a healthy profit. Problem is the ability to get those planes in flight. And my other prediction here for this category is that is not going to happen very soon. I'm sorry to say. Getting qualified pilots is not something you can just do at the flip of a switch or whenever you want to. You have to have those people meet certain minimums for a number of hours in the air before they become co-pilots, and then co-pilots become pilots and man up completely crews that can fly an aircraft, and that just isn't going to happen very quickly. So for airlines, what I see going in the future is a slight slowing in demand, some moderation of prices, some good cash positions for the airlines as we go through 2023. But there'll be still that same nagging problem of why is my flight completely full and why can't they have another route where they used to have 5? So that's, I believe, what's going to happen in 2023 for airlines. So, Andrea, what do you think is going to happen in 2023 with hotels?
Well, kind of on the topic of prices, I do feel the same way about hotel room rates. I do think room rates will moderate a little bit in 2023. Certainly, I think they are coming down already. It remains to be seen, in the high travel seasons of spring break, summer, if prices will kind of go back up and maybe even higher. I do believe there is still a little bit of pent up demand out there, but I think with inflation, as you said, Mike, the price for everything else has gone up, and consumers may be pulling back a little bit on discretionary spending, like on travel. So I do think room rates will be, a little bit lower than last year. Um, in terms of you mentioned the financial side of the airline industry. In terms of the hotel industry, those moderating prices will, sort of moderate the revenues that hoteliers will bring in 2023. I think hoteliers will still be looking for ways to save on costs of running the hotel, of which labor is the highest cost, of course, for running a hotel. And while, the hiring situation in hospitality has improved, I think, 2023 will still be kind of a year where it's, labor is still not where it was in the industry before the pandemic. And hoteliers are trying to figure out how to get by with fewer people working in the hotel, and, using technology, using other tools that they might be able to use to reduce labor costs. So perhaps, their bottom line situation maybe won't really change from last year, which some hotels had a great bottom line last year, again because of the high demand and because of the really, really high room rates. My other prediction was going to be how many new hotel brands will be introduced in 2023. And I had an original prediction, but already in January, we've had two new hotel brands introduced, one by Sonesta and one by Hilton. I'm not sure, maybe if there have been others. It's not the end of January yet, so who knows? But I originally predicted that there would be four new hotel brands introduced, but again, it's January and that's two already. So I think I'm going to bump up my prediction to five new hotel brands to be introduced in 2023. So we'll see if that prediction comes true.
All right, five. Okay, we'll mark that down. We'll check on that next January. So, just switching over to the one of my other topics, which is airports, and really airports, of course, go right in line with airlines themselves. And we've seen the demand for or actually the TSA throughput kind of stalling around the mid 90s, high 90s percentage wise of 2019. And that seems to be pretty steady. It might jump up a little bit, but of course, the swing factor here is business travel, which we're going to talk about later in this podcast. But it looks like we're almost back to full capacity for most of the airports. One of the things that we've seen in 2021 and 2022 was the selective routing of the airlines. And of course, airlines are very sophisticated about predicting, which routes are going to make the most profit for them and how they should run those particular routes. And there was quite a drop-off on some direct flights into smaller markets. The number of those reduced quite a bit in order to keep airlines in the air and full of people and actually finally get you to the destination you want to get to, even though you might have to stop in an airport where you never had to stop in one before. And that will continue into 2023. So we've got most airports kind of fully recovered, some airports not recovered. San Francisco International is probably the most, the biggest one that hasn't fully recovered as far as the passenger volume. That's simply because the tech sector isn't traveling as much as it did in 2019. And also travel from Asia, especially China, had not been allowed or had been greatly restricted in 2022. And now with the China market taking some of their restrictions off of travel, I believe we'll see some rebound for San Francisco. So their volume will go up, and as we've seen with other airports, their overall satisfaction will go down because they've had a very good year in the J.D. Power rankings simply because they've had quite a fewer people at San Francisco. But we're going to see the hub airports continue to be very, very busy, simply because that makes the most sense for the traditional hub and spoke airlines such as Delta, United, American, and to some extent Alaska. And so you'll see those airports will be very, very busy, and some of the smaller airports will be infrequently busy, meaning they'll be busy for only a third of the day when they were busy 2/3 of the day. And that makes a big difference in the way an airport operates and the amount of services they can offer based on the non-aeronautical revenue of selling you food, beverage, and some retail at the airports. So anyway, that's sort of the airports are going to go hand in hand with the airlines, but the staffing shortages will continue to affect airports, but not as much as it's going to affect airlines, simply because obviously an airline pilot is much harder to get a hold of and to qualify than someone to be a cash register worker or a barista at a coffee shop. So that's sort of what the airport outlook looks like for 2023. So, Andrea, what do we have a project that we've been doing quite a bit that I think people are aware of with on the predictions. We do predictions and forecasting of business travel. So, Andrea, what's the outlook for business travel in 2023?
Yeah, I think with the main thing is that transient business travel that struggled in 2023, or I'm sorry, 22, and I think I just don't think it's going to recover to 2019 levels this year. I think it's going to take another year, maybe another 2 years. Unfortunately, 2023, where maybe everyone would think the pandemic effects have been sort of reduced a little bit, but companies I think are concerned about the economy. They are trying to reduce expenses, and unfortunately, travel is one of the places where companies tend to look for cost savings. So I think that transient business travel is going to be affected by that, most likely in the first 6 months of the year. That said, if the economy improves, maybe things will get a little better. But I think there are some forecasts out there that, that really that transient business travel may not even come back until 2025. So it's quite a long time. In terms of group travel and conventions, meetings, conferences, that type of travel, that will continue to improve. It improved in 2022. I think, any conventions that perhaps didn't come back last year, 2023 would be the year where those conventions and conferences do come back. There was a lot of that type of travel in 2022, which really helped the business travel side of things. So I think 2023 should be okay for group travel. So that's my prediction. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But definitely, we hope everyone will look for our business travel index, which we do in partnership with Oxford Economics and the U.S. Travel Association. We are going to continue that in 2023. 2022 was the year we launched, and we're very excited. We've gotten great feedback on that piece of work, so we look forward to that.
All right, thanks. And I thought I'd end up with, last but not least, rental car. I've rented quite a few cars this past year, and speaking to other people who rent cars, they've all had the same concerns, I guess, or at least observations, is that they seem to be renting a car that is much older and in some cases much dirtier. But as anybody who's listened to this podcast probably knows, and you've heard us say this many times, there's a direct correlation between the age of a hotel room, the age of an aircraft interior, the age of an airport bathroom, and the age of a car, and just how clean it appears to be. And because we've had that chip shortage in the original equipment manufacturers for cars who are not able enough to release enough cars after they made them, because the chip that operates them isn't available, they've kind of redeployed some of that, and there have been some improvements, as I'm told by Tyson Jominy at JD Power, that there's been some improvement in the availability of cars, but not enough to appease or to meet the demand that we've seen in the rental car market. So rental car companies are still struggling to find vehicles, and they're putting cars into the field that are much older, 50, 60, 70,000 miles. I've rented cars with 50,000 miles or more, which is kind of unusual for a rental car company to have a car that old with that many miles on it in the past years on several occasions. So they'll continue to do that because they're not going to be producing tens and tens of thousands of them for the fleet market that the rental car business operates with. So we're going to continue to see higher prices for rental cars going through 2023, and we're also going to see a relatively lack of newer cars and a little bit more lower scores as far as cleanliness go. Service levels will probably be about the same. Again, the staffing issues that have really plagued everything else in the travel industry also apply to the rental car industry. And the other big trend, the last prediction here I've got, is the adoption of EVs among the rental car companies, and Hertz in particular is taking a big stock in electric vehicles, putting those into their fleet as fast as they possibly can. And I predict that's going to be a little bit of a rocky start here. I mean, I think for a long-term trend, it's probably a very interesting, and definitely there's a demand for EVs in the rental car market. But how you deploy those, what you're paying for that vehicle, what the value of that vehicle is at the end of its useful life to the rental car companies is a very different economic proposition than a gas-powered automobile. One of the things that we've been speaking with other experts in the rental car industry has been, where do you put these EVs? You're probably not going to put them in Phoenix, Arizona, or Tucson, Arizona, where you're having to drive long periods of times in extreme weather, in this case heat, in between charging stations. Because what happens, with someone who's renting a vehicle is that when something goes wrong with the vehicle, they just tend to walk away from it. And that's going to cause, I believe, some issues with the people who are not that familiar with how to operate an EV or what you need to do to make sure that EV gets there and back again. Because it's not the same as a gas-powered automobile where it takes 4 minutes to put about 500 miles worth of capacity into a gas-powered vehicle. It takes about 45 minutes to, I believe, get around 120 to 150 miles into an EV, depending on the charger and, of course, the battery itself. So there's going to be an uptake in EVs for the rental car industry, but it's going to be sort of a rocky road as far as the customer service goes. And eventually there'll be some learning that goes on, and that will probably be quite a bit of redeployment and what kind of purpose you're using these EVs for. If you're going to be doing it in the city for business travel, probably a great idea. No problem finding a charging station, no problem rolling into a charging station if you get that battery too low, and then recovery of that abandoned vehicle or the vehicle that might have run out of charge is going to be much easier for the rental car company. But if you're going to be out in, say, Sioux City, Iowa, that might be a completely different story. So in any event, those are the predictions we have for 2023. Andrew, do you have any other final thoughts for about 2023?
No. I think, it'll be a hopefully good year for travel. Of course, much better than some of the past years that we've seen. So, yeah, we'll have to see by the end of the year how many predictions have come true.
Yeah, we'll have to keep score here, see
Yes.
how well we do.
Right.
All right, well, thank you, Andrea. And again, this has been the JD Power Travel Podcast with Michael Taylor and Andrea Stokes. And we hope that you'll listen to us the next time. Thanks very much, and thanks for listening.